We'll go from one interview to another. June 20 is World Refugee Day, and according to the United Nations, the world is witnessing the highest levels of displacement on record. 85% of the world's 29.5 million refugees are being hosted in developing countries. 57% of refugees worldwide come from three countries: South Sudan, Afghanistan, and Syria. And these three countries have experienced extended periods of conflict, with at least 10 million stateless people, over 102,000 refugees, and more than 44,000 people forced to flee their homes on a daily basis. The UN Refugee Agency has just over 16,000 personnel around the world to sort through these problems. This year, the agency is turning to you and me for help. They want us to join the campaign, Step with Refugees, attend a world tour event, connect with an event or community group in our communities, share a refugee story, donate our miles to the UNHCR's 1 Billion Miles initiative, and take a step with UNHCR's Luku Luku campaign, which sheds light on Africa's refugee crisis. So much to do, so little time, so few personnel. Let's get talking with the UNHCR representative in Nigeria, Mr. Antonio Kayandula, who's a representative to Nigeria and the ECOWAS, and Mr. Alexander Kishara, who's the head of sub-office Maiduguri.
Mr. Jose Kayandula, thank you for joining us on Diplomatic Channel. Mr. Alexander Kishara, thank you for joining us on Diplomatic Channel. Mr. Kayandula, you are the UNHCR representative to Nigeria and to ECOWAS. Mr. Kishara, you're the head of sub-office of the UNHCR in Maiduguri. Gentlemen, thank you. Appreciate your being here, especially at a crucial time, for Africa, with the AU's theme for this year, surrounding refugees, the issue of refugees. Why is it such an important issue for this year? That all the groups, all the international organizations seem to be focusing a lot more on it.
Because, and thank you for receiving us. When you look at Africa, you look at a continent that has gone through quite a lot of conflicts. Our history of liberation in many countries is one that has also created situations of refugees. And we have quite a lot of situations of refugees today. There were refugees in the past that have finally gone back to their countries. But essentially, in the fight against colonialism, the AU, at that time, the Organization of African Unity, had then devised a charter dealing with the problems and the specific aspects of the problem of refugees in Africa that has become complementary to the UN Convention on Refugees, because in Africa the issue of refugees was particularly different. And today we are marking 50 years of the OAU Convention on the specific aspects of the refugee problem in Africa. But beyond that, and more, we are having more people that are actually being displaced, but they remain within their country. And they also have serious problems, as serious as the refugee problem, except they didn't cross the border, but they have the same needs. And therefore, 10 years ago also, in Kampala, the African countries decided to adopt a charter which is called the Kampala Convention on Internally Displaced Persons. It also coincides that this year is the 10th anniversary of the Kampala Convention. And the coincidence is particularly important because, as I said, you are a refugee because you crossed the border. Yeah. But if you didn't cross the border, you still are in the same difficult conditions as a refugee. In Nigeria in particular, we actually have the two situations of refugees. We have refugees from southern Cameroon. Yeah. You have heard about the Anglophone Cameroon. There are quite a lot of internally displaced Cameroonians inside Cameroon, and part of them have been displaced into Nigeria. The states of Taraba, Benue, Cross River, and Akwa Ibom. And then we also have a situation of internally displaced populations in northeast Nigeria, Borno, Adamawa, and Yobe. In the past, there were more states, but now they are focused on these 3 states. And those 3 states actually did not only create internal displacement, but also created refugees into Niger, Chad, and Cameroon. So the 2 are actually interlinked, refugees and internally displaced persons.
Mr. Kishara, who would you say is worse off, the refugee or the internally displaced person?
Actually, thank you for the invitation. Both the refugees and the internally displaced persons actually have the same issue. You can imagine a situation where a team, okay, if you have ever lost something in your life, very valuable thing, you can actually visualize this because these are people, both of them, the refugees and the IDPs, were forced out of their homes. They left everything. Some of them lost their relatives, their husbands, wives, sisters, and now they are forced into a situation where they have to stay away from home in a camp situation where they cannot be able to do anything. They depend on humanitarians, or the government, humanitarian community for assistance. So I would say that both of them actually go through the same suffering and need assistance.
So if you have, more people within, a country being internally displaced, then it means that, there's been crisis in that country. Whose responsibility is it to take care of these people? Because, government can only do so much. And it seems like, the bulk of the responsibility falls on the international community at the end of the day.
No, eventually, international community, and we as part of the international community represent that international solidarity. But the solution is not with the solidarity. The solution is actually owned by the government. Because precisely the government has quite a number of challenges to deal with, that's why they invite us to come and support them in resolving the problem. So we should be seen not as the solution, but as the support to the solution. And a solution can only be endogenous, can only be owned by the people and the government of the country.
So even though, refugees and internally displaced people have limited access to resources, they have limited access to the normal life that they know, do they have rights? Are they entitled to certain rights?
Well, precisely what we try to say is that a refugee or an internally displaced person is a person like you or like me, except they are probably in the wrong place and they are victims of situations they have not created. And that makes them vulnerable. Our role is actually to support the government to make sure that they regain those rights that any human being has, particularly social protection. The society should be able to protect the individual. The society should be able to say, he needs a blanket, he needs a house, he can't sleep under a tree, he needs health, he needs education, he needs to eat at least once a day.
A proper meal.
So, absolutely. So what we do is to try and support the government in bringing back those rights that have been lost because of circumstances. So they have rights, and indeed we are there to ensure that those rights are accessible to them.
The situation in Maiduguri has been on for a long time. I mean, you have IDPs who have been in, the IDP camps for a really long time, spanning into years. I know some have been able to return to their villages because security has improved, all thanks to the military. But give us an idea of what the situation is like currently, since that's where you're based.
Thank you very much. If you look at the situation now in the Northeast, as Mr. Kanyandula mentioned earlier on, we had a situation in 6 states before. Now this is reduced to 3 states, that is Borno, Adamawa, and Yobe State. This is where we have critical needs. In Borno State particularly, we have a number of people who are in the camps. The total population that is displaced at the moment is estimated at 1.8 million people who are internally displaced. As you mentioned, they have been staying in the camps for the last 10 years. Some of them actually have gone back and then also have returned to the IDP camp. I've lived in the Northeast for the last 8 months. Sometimes when I'm in some of the other cities and I tell people that I'm in the Northeast, they are like, oh, it's like they are surprised. The key thing to understand is that it's part of Nigeria. The Northeast is part of Nigeria. And these are people who need support from well-endowed areas, like here in Lagos. Lagos, we know, is the center of the business, with booming business. We would like to see support to these people so that it's not only left to the government and the humanitarian community, but so that the other members of society can be able to support.
Here's our stop on the program today. Remember to take a step with refugees today. Go to the UNHCR website to find out how. I am Amarachi Ubani. I'll see you next time.